Hi everyone, Helen Blunden here. Hope you're happy, healthy and well. It is time for a new book review today, and today I have the pleasure of reviewing Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. She wrote this book in 1847 and it is her first and only novel. She had written a whole heap of poems, but I hadn't read her poem. She actually kind of reminds me of Sylvia Plath, who also wrote one novel but was a poet herself. This book has a bit of a story as to why I came about reading it. This year I started to read Bronte, and my first Bronte book that I read was Jane Eyre from Charlotte Bronte, and I loved Jane Eyre. It quickly became the best book I'd read in 2023, and in fact I would say it's the best book I have ever read in my life. After I'd read that book, my husband says, well, why don't you have a go at reading her sister's book, Wuthering Heights? Now, my husband raved about this book. He loved this book. He said he read it from cover to cover. It was like his best book of all time. Let me just say that I didn't have that same experience, but I'm going to say that I understand why this is a classic. This YouTube channel is all about lessons from books, and it's kind of like my lessons from books. And I'm going to say that one of the things I've noticed about myself as I read books and have been reading books for many years is this year in particular, some books have kind of rubbed me up the wrong way. And when I say that they rub me up the wrong way, the only reason is because I have approached them with my 2023 mentality. The mentality that tells me that I am a woman of a certain age who has gone through certain experiences, certain conditions in life, knows what's right, what's wrong, and so forth. So I approach books with the expectation and the questions and sometimes the curiosity as to why the protagonists do things a certain way. And I have come to understand that I shouldn't approach books with my 2023 thinking. I should actually kind of like hold all judgment and just go with the flow, go with the story, go with the fiction, because after all, that is what it's about, as opposed to getting cranky about what the protagonists are doing or trying to question their motives and why they're doing things a certain way, simply because that's not what I would have done. The lesson for me in reading Bronte, especially Emily's Wuthering Heights, is this came out quite strongly for me, and I can understand why this is a classic. Even though initially I didn't enjoy reading it, the reason why I didn't enjoy reading it is because I had my 2023 thinking hat on, and I thought to myself, in real life, in 2023, the people in here would have all been toxic personalities. They would have all experienced intergenerational abuse. They would have been awful characters to be around, because after all, none of these people had any endearing qualities about them whatsoever. And that's why I got so worked up and so angry about people like Heathcliff and people like Cathy, and going, my God, haven't they understood? Like Heathcliff, he comes from a background of being a poor orphan. Hasn't he understood that, yes, life is tough, but don't get obsessed by Cathy, who is completely horrible to you. Why would you let this woman ruin your life and ruin a life that you could potentially be well at? And we saw that you could go well at when you left Wuthering Heights to go and find yourself, but then you came anyway. So do you get my drift? So I went into this book with my 2023 thinking, and I shouldn't have. I can understand why it's a classic, because it gets you quite emotional. It gets you to the point that even though you might not like reading the book, you start to question the characters' motives. You start to talk about the characters and the storylines with other people. You start to question why they're like that. You kind of put yourself in their shoes going, okay, let's think. If this was the 1800s and you're on the Yorkshire moors, it's freezing cold, it's wet, it's really windy, you're living in a house in the middle of nowhere, and the only other house has got a family a little bit richer than what your circumstances are, but they are miles away. It's a pretty bleak environment. It's a pretty depressing environment. When I come to think about it that way, I think, okay, maybe maybe this was the whole point. This was what Emily had created, to kind of create that bleakness, the darkness, the tragic, the awfulness, the just blah, it just everything. This whole book just kind of read grey to me, and it was really, really depressing. If you're thinking it, saying Wuthering Heights is a love story, no, I wouldn't say it's a love story. Again, I've got my 2023 thinking on, and I would say, if we're talking about obsession, obsession has no place in love. That's my thinking. If you're loving someone, you love them for who they are, and you love them to allow them also to be themselves, to be their own person. And what I saw here was both Cathy and Heathcliff were so obsessed with each other at the expense of everyone and everything else around them. And they weren't in a position where they could just talk things out. If they talked things out and actually talked about their feelings, maybe it wouldn't have been a problem. But that's my 2023 thinking. Do you get what I'm saying here? My biggest lesson for me in this book was not about the book itself. The book is a classic. I can see it's a classic. It's obviously got me worked up. I didn't like it, and yet I did like it, if that makes sense. I did like it because it got me worked up, and it made me really talk about it with my husband. We saw things completely differently, but at the same time, it made me realize that I go into books with my 2023 thinking, and sometimes I've got to suspend judgment. What I saw in this book is it's not a love story. It's a story of complete and utter obsession, a story of trauma, a story of hopelessness. Didn't take to any of the characters. In fact, I thought Cathy was a cow. I would be reading the book in bed at night and I would just be going, oh my God, Cathy, you cow. That's what I've been saying. In my own diary, I wrote, and in quotes, as you can see here, I'm still reading Wuthering Heights. Heathcliff should hurry up and just die already. Can you see how strong the language is and how strong these characters, they made me so emotive, because I just could not understand the bleakness, obsession they had with each other. Another thing about this book is everything about it is like dark, it's grey, it is heavy, it is wet and damp, just like the Yorkshire moors. It's a book that you think long and hard afterwards. It's a book that I know you're either going to love or hate. I'm not going to say I hate it, but it's a book that's just made me keep thinking about it long afterwards. I even watched 2 movies of Wuthering Heights on YouTube, and both of them made me think as to the characters and whether I could change my mind. And no, I didn't change my mind. The thing for me was that tragic circumstances and tragic behaviors, toxic behaviors perpetuate through generation. I just thought in my 2023 thinking, if only Cathy and Heathcliff were able to talk things through and actually tell things as they were to each other, be open and upfront to each other, then all this wouldn't have happened. But I could be wrong. After all, going into my 2023 thinking, who's to say that in the 1800s things were different, situations were different, the environments were different. These were really poor people. They had completely different thinking and expectations with each other. And overall, just the situation was utter sad. There is nothing positive about this book. The only inkling of sadness, tiny bit of sadness I had was the moment that Heathcliff tried to dig up Cathy. And in that moment, I actually really felt for him. I think I shed a tear at that point. I really felt sorry for him. But at the other times, I thought to myself, he hasn't seen how horribly Cathy treats him. Why is he still with her? Why is he still obsessed over her? But this image of him trying to claw the earth to get to her coffin was something that I shed a tear over, because to me it was kind of like the ultimate grief. This man would have never experienced anything positive in his life, and he mistakenly thought his love of Cathy was positive, It was obsession. I didn't see it as a love story. I saw it simply as a book about obsession. It is a deep and a heavy book. It is a book that makes you think long and hard afterwards. It's a book that makes you have arguments with people who simply love this book and others who despise it. I read somewhere that if you love Jane Eyre, you're going to hate Wuthering Heights, and if you love Wuthering Heights, you're going to hate Jane Eyre. To me, I don't say I won't hate Wuthering Heights. I think it just was a very depressing book, and it was a book that made me think, my God, Emily Bronte, what? To think about such a storyline in its heaviness. What did these women go through at this time? What were the situations for her to have come up with such a depressing storyline? Like, who comes up with these storylines and these plots? Never in my wildest dreams would I have dreamt something like this and to write something like this. But it obviously comes from a work of someone who is highly, highly empathetic, someone who is highly, highly sensitive, someone who actually feels a lot, can express herself in such a way that in the first book that she has written, it becomes a classic and it becomes a talking point for the people when it was published at this time. So that in itself is creative genius. And I do wonder if Emily wasn't taken so early, what other books she may have written, hopefully not as depressing as this one. But look, I'm glad I read Wuthering Heights. Now I have a completely different perception about the gift that we all see about Heathcliff and Cathy running to each other. In the past, I mistakenly thought it was a positive love story, and I'm glad to say I am completely wrong. Let me know what you think about Wuthering Heights. Or, have you read this book? What did you think of it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Were there any characters you liked? If you did, please tell me, because I didn't like any of them. None of them. They're all cruel. What a book. Right, that's it. Thank you for listening, and thank you for watching. Bye for now.